Democratic Republic of Congo President Joseph Kabila names a new prime minister. A new study concludes that pharmaceutical companies' strategies for reaching the poor are maturing, but there's still more work to be done. And the latest high-tech inventions hold promise for the disabled. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidu Ewart. This is Africa 54. Vincent Makori is off today. We begin tonight with news from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where President Joseph Kabila has named a new prime minister. Kabila picked opposition lawmaker Badibanga Ntita to lead the unity government that will run the country until postponed elections are held. The elections, originally slated for this month, are now provisionally scheduled for April 2018. The previous government resigned this week in line with a deal between the president and an opposition faction that will allow Kabila to stay in office past the end of his second term. The choice of Same was seen as a surprise. Vital Kamerhe, who led the opposition faction that negotiated with Kabila, was widely expected to become prime minister. The larger opposition faction objects to the deal and is calling on Kabila to step down by December 19, the date his second term comes to an end, according to DRC's constitution. Moving to East Africa, Kenya says it will delay closing the Dadaab refugee camp. Interior Minister Joseph Ole Nkaissery says Somali refugees living there will be given 6 months to find new homes. Kenya sees the Dadaab refugee camp as a security risk. The government had vowed to shut it down this month, saying the camp was being used by Somali Islamic militants to launch attacks inside Kenya. Dadaab is the world's largest refugee camp. It's home to more than 250,000 people. Earlier this year, Kenya began what it calls voluntary repatriation of refugees back to Somalia. But human rights groups say Kenya is trying to forcibly send refugees back to a war zone in Somalia. They are pressing the government to publicly reassure the refugees that they are welcome in Kenya until it's safe for them to return home. Kenya, however, maintains the temporary reprieve will not interrupt the repatriation program. 2 years ago, 57 girls jumped off a truck used to kidnap them by Boko Haram militants in northeastern Nigeria. That daring escape not only saved their lives, but gave them a chance to go to school. Today, 24 of those girls are taking classes at the American University of Nigeria in Yola. But starting school was a challenge for many of them. Some could not read or write fluently. School psychologists say the girls were traumatized and often feared for their safety. The school devised a special program to help the girls cope. Boko Haram has abducted hundreds of people in Nigeria, killed thousands, and displaced more than 2 million people. The terror group released 21 girls last month after striking a deal with the Red Cross and the Swiss government. 22 girls remain missing. Staying in Nigeria, the United Nations has released footage showing thousands of malnourished children living in a former Boko Haram stronghold in the northeastern part of the country. The UN says about 14 million people there need urgent humanitarian help, and that 75,000 children are at risk of dying from the famine in the next year. Nigeria's military, backed by forces from neighboring African countries, have managed to push Boko Haram back to Sambisa forest in the last few months. That's how aid workers were able to access areas previously controlled by the terror group, revealing thousands of people living in famine-like conditions. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is expected to highlight the importance of the security alliance between his country and the United States as he meets Thursday with President-elect Donald Trump. Before departing Japan, Abe told reporters he wanted to use the meeting to discuss his vision for the future with Trump.
The Japan-US alliance is a pivot of Japan's diplomacy and security. The alliance only works based on trust. So I would like to build that trust with President Trump. And based on that, I would like to work together with him towards world peace and prosperity.
During his campaign, Trump questioned several bedrocks of the U.S.-Japanese relationship, suggesting that the U.S. was doing too much to provide defense to Japan. He floated the idea of allowing Japan and others in the region nuclear weapons and forcing higher payments to support the deployment of U.S. forces in those countries. The U.S. has about 53,000 military personnel based in Japan, along with 43,000 dependent family members and 5,000 Defense Department civilian employees. Supporters of the Defense Alliance argue that beyond the benefits to Japan, 3 are strategic gains for the U.S. by having its forces deployed in that part of the world. Since winning election last week, Trump has spoken by phone with a number of world leaders, including Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Russian President Vladimir Putin. But the talks with Abe will be the first in-person meeting for Trump as he prepares to take office in January. As Russian and Syrian government forces resume air attacks on Aleppo, there are growing fears among Syrian rebels that they may lose the support of the United States once President-elect Donald Trump takes office in January. Across the Middle East, rival powers are trying to digest the implications of Trump's election victory for the region, which remains beset by conflict in Syria, Iraq, Yemen and Libya. Henry Ridgewell reports.
Russian and Syrian jets pound rebel-held eastern Aleppo. Moscow earlier this week declared a major operation against rebels as its warplanes launched attacks from the Mediterranean.
For the first time in Russian naval history, the aircraft carrier was involved in combat actions.
The United States accuses Russia and its Syrian government allies of causing mass civilian deaths, but President-elect Donald Trump signalled a softened tone during his election campaign.
Trump has been relatively positive about Russia under Vladimir Putin and Russia's role in Syria as a supposed force against ISIS.
That has raised fears in the region that the Trump administration may withdraw support for Sunni rebel fighters, handing a big advantage to the Syrian government and its Shiite backers in Iran. Conversely, the Iran nuclear accord, which saw sanctions dropped in return for limits on nuclear activity, could be torn up by Trump, who has called it a disastrous deal. This position has gained him some support among Sunni regional powers.
Obama has been really disliked by Gulf elites, most of all because of the deal with Iran. They regard him as having been soft and naive on Iran, and the more hawkish language that Donald Trump has used has gone down well, but there is complete uncertainty about what it means in practice.
French President François Hollande Wednesday warned Trump against reneging on the nuclear deal with Iran.
This deal gives us guarantees. The absence of an agreement would be very serious.
There are, as yet, few indications over the direction of Trump's future foreign policy, especially as he weighs choices for his cabinet. But most analysts agree his approach will mark a sharp contrast to that of Barack Obama.
Trump has for years given the impression that he respects the strongman model of government, whether that's in China or in Russia, and that he has seen dictators in the Middle East as at least a force against terrorism.
With conflicts raging from Yemen to Libya, the Middle East will likely provide the first test for Donald Trump's promised strategic reset of US foreign policy. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Staying on American politics, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is denying reports of infighting within his transition team and claims via Twitter that a very organized process is taking place as he selects members of his cabinet. He has already replaced New Jersey Governor Chris Christie with Vice President-elect Mike Pence as the head of the transition team. Former Congressman Mike Rogers, a top national security advisor, said Tuesday he was leaving the team. Trump has been under fire for his choice of chief White House staff strategist, and questions persist about the role of his 3 children and son-in-law in the process. In addition, he is facing continued opposition among ordinary Americans who found his campaign rhetoric offensive and divisive. Zlatsa Hoke reports.
Students at Yale University walked out of classes on Wednesday to support undocumented peers. Protest organizers are calling for their schools to shelter people who may face deportation. In New York City, Trump's name was removed from 3 rental towers he once owned after 600 residents signed an online petition.
Once he started being very derogatory towards women, racist remarks, and just being in an overall total embarrassment, we knew that we did not feel safe with his name on the building.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio addressed citizens' concerns in an hour-long meeting with Trump.
He is a New Yorker. I do think he loves this city. But I thought it was very important for him to hear what people are feeling, and very important for him to hear what our experience has been.
De Blasio said he also questioned Trump about his selection of Steve Bannon as his chief advisor. Bannon has been linked with conservative alt-right groups that embrace and promote white nationalism, and as a media person, he has expressed views that many see as racist and misogynist. Some Republican lawmakers also have criticized Trump in the past, but they presented a united front on Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on White House personnel choices.
Democrats have started efforts to reinvigorate the party after the unexpected loss in the presidential election. Senator Charles Schumer, the new Senate minority leader, announced newly elected party leaders on Wednesday.
I can tell the American people this. We're ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with Republicans, working with soon-to-be President Trump on issues where we agree. But we will go toe-to-toe against the president-elect whenever our values or the progress we've made is under assault.
The new Congress will have a Republican majority in both chambers. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, a closer look at the big drug companies that are helping the poor. Stay with us.
For a healthier planet.
It's taken a while, but a global commission has finally agreed to preserve the world's largest marine park in one of the most remote places on Earth.
This agreement is so important because it addresses many of the impacts that we're seeing now, like climate change and pollution and overfishing that are harming our oceans.
That's Kathy Balthman-McLeod of the Nature Conservancy speaking about the recent agreement to protect more than 1 million square kilometers around the Ross Sea in Antarctica.
One of the last intact marine ecosystems in the world, and it is a wealth of marine biodiversity.
The historic agreement bans fishing in the Ross Sea Marine Park for 35 years, with an exception for some research vessels.
Oceans around the world are interconnected, and Antarctica gives us a great example of what's happening in the rest of the world.
The proposal took 6 years before all 25 members, including Russia, China, the U.S., and European Union, agreed to it. I'm Rebecca Ward for VOA's Green Beat.
I'm Milar Sega. I'm the host of VOA's The Correspondents, a roundup of the world's top stories with analysis from our dedicated reporters. It's really a conversation the same way that you would bring a friend to your home and ask them what's going on. And our correspondents will do that and answer those questions through their own eyes.
That appears a false choice in more ways than one.
We can't actually put you there, but we can come pretty close. In 30 minutes, we'll show you the world.
And joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Modu. What do you have for us today, Lino?
Hello, Esther. Well, in new research led by the World Health Organization, scientists say the number of people with high blood pressure has almost doubled in 40 years to over 1.1 billion worldwide. The largest study of its kind analyzed blood pressure in every nation between 1975 and 2015. Results show that high blood pressure, also known as hypertension, has dropped sharply in wealthy countries, possibly due to healthier diets and lifestyles, but risen in poorer ones. The increases are especially significant in Africa and South Asia. The researchers say it could be partly due to poor nutrition in childhood. Hypertension is the world's top cause of cardiovascular disease, which leads to strokes and heart attacks. It is estimated to cause 7.5 million deaths a year worldwide. The study was published in the Lancet Medical Journal. Now, the 2016 Access to Medicine Index has just been released. The Access to Medicine Index analyzes the top 20 research-based pharmaceutical companies with products for high-burden diseases in low- and middle-income countries. GSK leads for the 5th time ahead of Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, and Merck KGaA. Statistics say 2 billion people in the world have no access to medicine. The index is published every 2 years by the Access to Medicine Foundation, an independent non-profit organization funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the UK Department for International Development. Joining us via remote from our London studio is Dr. Jayashree Iyer, Executive Director of the Access to Medicine Foundation. Dr. Iyer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
First off, tell us about the significance of the Access to Medicine Index and the type of impact that it's making in really addressing the issue.
So the Access to Medicine Index is a tool that we use to encourage the pharmaceutical industry to do more for people living in low middle income countries in improving access to medicines that are produced by the pharmaceutical industry. And we cover a range of 20 of the largest pharmaceutical companies and their activities in 107 countries over 51 diseases. The kind of influence that we have is in stimulating the companies to do more in these markets, to push themselves further, challenge themselves, and work with local stakeholders in improving some of the health outcomes through improving access to the products that they have control over.
This is a very critical issue when we know that there are some areas in the world where people don't have the basic medicine that they need. Now, tell us, what are some big trends that we are seeing in this new index?
So among the many trends that we see, one critical one is we're seeing more companies setting up proper business models for Africa. So many years ago, there was only a couple of companies that were active from the big pharmaceutical companies in Africa, which meant that key products were not reaching the people in various countries in Africa itself. Sanofi was one of the forefront companies that were very active in some of the Francophone countries in Africa. Today, in 2014, we then saw about 9 companies setting up business models. And today we have about 14 companies who dedicate business models specifically to Africa. And some of that range from looking at specific products in specific countries, like AbbVie and Bristol Myers Squibb focus on HIV/AIDS, and some of them are much more ambitious and broader, and that's like GlaxoSmithKline has a 2020 strategy for Africa, and Johnson & Johnson also has a dedicated African business unit.
When we look at diseases like neglected tropical diseases, to what extent is this a priority, or maybe one of the on their agenda, when we understand that these diseases really don't concern a big part of the world?
Yeah. So more and more, as more governments and people start prioritizing the importance of neglected tropical diseases, we found that the pharmaceutical industry actually respond to contributing to the area of neglected tropical diseases. In 2 main areas we're seeing this. One is in product donations, which are very important in eradicating and eliminating these diseases from entire population burdens. The second area is in research and development, in really developing new products that can be more effective in treating some of these diseases itself. And there we've seen the role of partnerships really playing an important role. We see now several companies getting involved, and really important products are being developed, such as things for soil-transmitted helminths, schistosomiasis, for Chagas disease, for leishmaniasis, and so on.
Okay, and quickly before we wrap up, what is the takeaway then from this year's index?
So the main takeaway from this is that while pharma companies are doing a lot more, especially in a continent like Africa, and most of the activities are focused on capacity building and setting up new systems to make sure that more people have access to medicine and come forward and are more aware of medicines, and really affecting some parts of the supply chain. But there's still so much more to be done. Most of the activities are concentrated on specific diseases, specific countries and specific groups of people, and what we're trying to do here now is to encourage the pharmaceutical industry to do more for the people, and we're hoping that in the countries will start prioritizing healthcare, prioritizing the financing of healthcare, and really insist that the pharmaceutical industries, as they're working in these companies, in these countries, actually bring forward affordable quality solutions.
Okay, great. Dr. Ayer, thank you so much for joining us. And that was Dr. Jesri Ayer. She's Executive Director of the Access to Medicine Foundation. And that's our health report for today, so stay in touch with me for more. Find me on Twitter @LinorMoudou. Back to you, Esther.
And thank you for joining us today, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Moudou every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa, right here on Africa 54. In Africa, the mobile money market across the continent handles billions of dollars of transactions annually. In Kenya, M-Pesa mobile money transfer system is credited with transforming the economy, while a new study shows its impact on the social relationships and culture in the rural areas of the country. VOA's Jackson Bunganyi reports.
Studies show that sub-Saharan Africa is the world's third largest mobile market. More than 80% of the continent's overall population have access to cell phones. The majority of mobile subscribers reside in rural areas. And even though many of them have no access to traditional banking, the introduction of mobile money transfer services in the last decade has opened them to new opportunities in what many see as the beginning of Africa's first paperless economy.
It's been really important because it's helped people access money, especially people who don't have access to a bank. So for a lot of people in rural areas that aren't well served by banking or other sort of financial services, it's a way for people to gain access to money that's been really, really important. A lot of people who work in urban areas and who have jobs can now send money to friends and relatives in places where they don't have a lot of access. So it's really helped to spread money around.
Sibo Kusimba is an anthropologist who worked and taught in Kenya. She has published research on the use of mobile money in rural Kenya. M-Pesa, the most popular mobile money transfer system, was launched in 2007. It is now used by over 17 million Kenyans. Kusimba says that use of mobile money services is creating new forms of social and communal life.
It's a way to send gifts. It's a way to make a social connection. It's a way to keep friends. It's a way to stay active in a community that maybe you don't visit as often as you would like. So it has all these dimensions of meaning for people as a way to keep their social connections alive.
Now, most scholars have been approaching the study of M-Pesa and many of these new technologies in Africa from a developmental standpoint. You went in as an anthropologist.
It's true that the development community, this being Africa, of course, it's true that a lot of external stakeholders are looking at this service and hoping and expecting that it will do certain things for Africa. Economic development is usually the way in which this service is understood. And of course, the economic aspect is important. But what I learned is that it's important for the culture, it's important for what the people themselves value. A lot of times they value their social relationships just as much as they do their bank accounts or the projects that they have. So I've learned that people really think in terms of spreading out the benefits that they receive, and they use their phone as a way of building communities, keeping in touch with people who are close to them, sharing resources and sharing the benefits that they've received. So that sense of creating groups of people who benefit together, who share things, I think is really important in how this service is used.
For years, anthropologists like Sibo Kusimba have been studying the specific roles that money can play in different social settings. In societies where money is not traditionally part of their transactional systems, it will be interesting to see how, over time, M-Pesa and other forms of money transfer systems will shape relationships and other socio-economic dynamics as regards to ownership, contracts, etc. For Voice of America, I'm Jackson Vunganyi.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, how high-tech could help the disabled. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Nigeria, members of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria bury some of its members that they alleged were killed during clashes with police. We stay in Nigeria, where the UN warns that around 14 million people will need humanitarian help, and 75,000 children are at risk of dying from famine in 2017. In Morocco, an African Action Summit starts in the nation as the kingdom presses a bid to rejoin the continental bloc of the African Union 32 years after walking out. In Uganda, mobile health clinics in the form of tuk-tuks help reduce the numbers of teen pregnancy. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
And welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. A paralyzed man in Taiwan with motor neuron disease is helping scientists build a mind-reading machine to help him and other patients to communicate. The device enables patients to make their wishes known to doctors and their loved ones on a very simple level. He wears a cap fitted with electrodes, which transmits his brain waves to the software in the computer. This allows him to transmit very basic yes or no decisions. Taipei researchers say there are still technical difficulties they have to overcome before the prototype can be deployed for use by other patients. In other tech news, virtual reality is taking center stage at the 18th China High-Tech Fair in southern city of Shenzhen. But instead of showcasing single games or glasses, dozens of exhibitors have come with more developed and wide-ranging products this time. Among the hottest exhibits at the annual fair is the third-generation recovery exoskeleton robot for those patients who have problems to walk. There's also a helmet for the blind that will be able to collect data from the surrounding environment and send it back to a big data center via a 5G network, helping the helmet wearer navigate their environment. And finally, it's one of the most coveted party invites there is, the Nobel Prize Awards. But legendary singer-songwriter Bob Dylan won't be there to pick up his prize for literature. The notoriously media-shy singer-cum-songwriter finally told the Nobel Committee he will be a no-show for the December 10th ceremony. He sent them a letter saying he has pre-existing commitments that day and won't be able to travel to Stockholm, but he will accept the nearly $900,000 in prize money. But there's a catch. He will have to give a Nobel lecture first to collect the money sometime within 6 months of the ceremony. And that's what's trending today. And that's also our show for today. Good night from Washington.
Welcome to the Voice of America's News Words.
This word is one you hear in stories about troubled places. The story is about a man who protested the lack of freedom in his homeland, Myanmar.
Turmoil.
For Myanmar, the coming year will test whether critics like Gambira have reason for pessimism, or whether authorities can conduct a free and fair election without turmoil in the streets.
The word turmoil means something is mixed up and lacks order.
If there is turmoil in the streets, it means there could be protesters and violence, and police cannot control the crowds.
Now, when you hear the word turmoil, your American English will be good enough to know what this news word means.